Every evening, as the sun began to sink below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the sleepy town, little Tommy would climb onto the windowsill of their modest home and press his small hands against the glass.
His big, hopeful eyes would scan the street, waiting, searching for the familiar figure of his father.
His big, hopeful eyes would scan the street, waiting, searching for the familiar figure of his father. His mother, Emily, would stand in the doorway of the kitchen watching him, her heart breaking a little more each day.
She had long since stopped expecting any sign of her husband, David.
But Tommy, in his innocent, unwavering hope, couldn't understand why his father wasn't coming home.
He believed, with all the faith a 6-year-old boy could muster, that his dad would walk back through the door any moment now, scoop him up in his arms, and everything would be okay again.
It had been 6 months since David left.
No warning, no explanation, just a hastily written note left on the kitchen table one morning. "I'm sorry, Emily. I can't do this anymore. I found someone else. Please don't hate me."
Emily had read those words over and over, hoping they would make sense eventually, but they never did. How could a man who once loved her so deeply, who had promised to build a life with her, just walk away? How could he leave behind the son who adored him more than anything in the world? The betrayal ran deep, cutting into the very core of her being. But the hardest part wasn't the loss of her husband. It was watching Tommy wait for a man who had no intention of ever coming back.
"Mommy, do you think Daddy will come today?"
Tommy would ask every evening, his voice tinged with hope. Emily's throat would tighten and she'd force a smile, even though her heart felt like it was shattering all over again.
"Maybe, sweetheart,"
she'd whisper, though she knew the answer was no. David had left for another woman, a younger, flashier woman named Megan, who lived in the city. Emily had never met her, but the rumors had started to spread shortly after David walked out the door. She had heard enough to know that Megan had no interest in Tommy, and David seemed too caught up in his new life to care about the family he had abandoned. Tommy had no idea why his dad was gone. Emily didn't have the heart to tell him the truth. How could she explain to a 6-year-old that his father had chosen someone else, that he had decided their family wasn't enough? So instead, she let Tommy believe that maybe, just maybe, one day David would return. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still, every evening Tommy would climb onto that windowsill and wait. His faith never wavered, even as the seasons changed, even as the world around him moved on. Emily watched helplessly as her little boy's hope became a quiet desperation, the waiting stretching out like an endless, painful eternity. One cold winter's evening, as the snow began to fall outside, Tommy sat by the window again, his breath fogging up the glass. He had drawn little hearts and stars in the condensation, his small fingers tracing patterns that Emily knew came from a place of longing.
"Mommy, do you think Daddy forgot about us?"
Emily froze. She hadn't expected the question, hadn't prepared herself for the moment when Tommy would start to doubt. Her chest tightened with sorrow and she walked over to him, kneeling beside the windowsill. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his small frame.
"No, baby, your daddy, he just..."
"But why isn't he here?"
Tommy asked, turning his wide eyes toward her, the innocence in them tearing her apart. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat, her eyes stinging with unshed tears.
"Sometimes people make choices that hurt others, and sometimes they don't realize how much they're hurting the people they love."
Tommy's brow furrowed as he tried to understand.
"Does Daddy still love me?"
The question was like a knife to Emily's heart. She pulled Tommy into her arms, holding him close, feeling the warmth of his little body against hers.
Of course he does. You're his son and he loves you so much.
But Tommy didn't seem convinced. He pulled away slightly, his eyes drifting back to the window.
Then why doesn't he come home?
Emily had no answer for that. All she could do was hold him, stroke his hair, and hope that one day the hurt would fade. But in the quiet of the evening, as Tommy's eyes remained fixed on the empty street outside, Emily knew that her son was starting to lose the last bit of hope he had clung to for so long. The days continued to pass, and eventually the questions stopped.
I no longer asked if my dad would come back, no longer sat at the window every night.
But Emily could see the change in him. He was quieter now, more withdrawn. The bright, innocent joy that had once filled their home had dimmed, replaced by a sadness that was far too heavy for a child his age to carry. Then one day, out of the blue, the phone rang.
Hello?
Emily picked it up, not recognizing the number, and her heart skipped a beat when she heard David's voice on the other end.
Emily, I want to see Tommy.
Her initial reaction was anger. How dare he after all this time? But then she thought of Tommy, of the boy who had waited so long for this moment. She couldn't deny him the chance, even if it meant opening old wounds.
Okay, but you explained to him why you left.
David agreed, and they arranged for him to come the next day. When Tommy saw his dad standing at the door, his eyes lit up with a mixture of joy and confusion.
Dad!
He ran into David's arms, the months of absence forgotten in a moment of pure, innocent love.
Hey, buddy, I missed you so much.
But as David sat down with Tommy, trying to explain why he had left, the truth became impossible to avoid.
Tommy, I need to tell you why I wasn't here.
Why didn't you come back? Why didn't you call? Don't you love us anymore?
David's answers were weak, full of excuses, and as Tommy listened, his face slowly fell.
I was busy and things got complicated, but I do love you, Tommy. I really do.
The truth, as much as Emily had tried to protect him from it, was sinking in.
Mom, why does it hurt so much?
By the time David left, Tommy's hope had been replaced by a deep sadness.
I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I wish I could make it better.
He no longer waited by the window, no longer asked when his dad would come home. And as Emily held him close that night, she knew that the little boy who had once believed in the power of love and family had lost something precious: his innocence, his faith in the world. And though David had left them long ago, it was that moment when Tommy finally understood that truly broke their family apart. As time passed, the emptiness in their home seemed to grow heavier with each day. Emily watched as Tommy withdrew further into himself, his once bright and hopeful eyes now dulled by the weight of abandonment. Every morning he would still glance out the window, hoping, wishing that his father might return, but each time he was met with nothing but the empty street. The distance between mother and son became harder to ignore. Emily tried everything she could to bring light back into Tommy's life, planning fun outings, buying his favorite toys, and even baking the cookies he loved. But none of it could replace the void that David had left. It was as if Tommy had built an invisible wall around himself, and no matter how hard Emily tried, she couldn't find a way to break through. One evening, after another failed attempt to connect with Tommy, Emily found herself sitting in the living room, her hands trembling around a cup of tea. The silence in the house was suffocating. She stared at the phone on the table, tempted to call David, to beg him to come back, even if just for Tommy's sake. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't make a difference. He had moved on with his new life, leaving them behind like an old memory he no longer cared to revisit. That night, Tommy came downstairs with tears in his eyes. clutching the stuffed bear his father had given him long ago. Emily's heart broke all over again at the sight of her son's pain. "Mom," Tommy whispered, his voice small and broken, "why doesn't Daddy want to see me anymore?" Emily's breath caught in her throat. How could she explain the complexity of adult relationships to a child? How could she tell him that sometimes people make choices that hurt the ones they love the most? "I don't know, sweetheart," she finally managed to say, pulling Tommy into her arms. "But it's not your fault. Your daddy loves you. He's just confused right now." Tommy buried his face in her shoulder, his little body trembling as he sobbed. "I just want him to come back," he cried. "I just want us to be a family again." Emily held him tighter, her own tears spilling down her cheeks. She wished she could promise him that everything would be okay, that David would return and they'd be whole again. But she couldn't. All she could do was hold Tommy and hope that one day the pain would lessen for both of them. One evening, a letter arrived in the mail. Emily's hands shook as she recognized David's handwriting on the envelope. It had been months since they had heard from him, and she wasn't sure what to expect. With trembling fingers, she opened the letter and began to read. "Emily, I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you and Tommy more than I can ever make up for, but I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize now that walking away from you both was the biggest mistake of my life. I want to see Tommy. I want to try to make things right." Emily's heart raced as she read the words. Could it be possible that David was finally ready to be a part of their lives again? But as she stared at the letter, the weight of everything that had happened between them pressed down on her. Could she really allow him back into Tommy's life after all the pain he had caused? Could she risk her son's fragile heart being broken all over again? When she told Tommy about the letter, his face lit up with a glimmer of hope she hadn't seen in months. "Is Daddy really coming back?" he asked, his voice filled with cautious excitement. "I don't know," Emily said softly, kneeling down to look into his eyes. "But I'll talk to him, and we'll figure things out. I just want to make sure that whatever happens, you're safe and happy." The following week, David showed up at their doorstep. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she opened the door, her emotions a tangled mess of anger, longing, and uncertainty. Tommy stood beside her, clutching her hand tightly. "Daddy!" Tommy's voice was filled with a mix of joy and trepidation. David knelt down, arms open, and Tommy ran into them without hesitation, clinging to his father as if he might disappear again. Emily watched, her throat tight as tears welled up in her eyes. For a brief moment, it was like a glimpse of the family they once were. But the past couldn't be erased so easily. As they sat down to talk, Emily and David exchanged words that were heavy with history and regret. David apologized again and again, promising that he wanted to be there for Tommy now. But Emily's trust had been shattered, and she wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. They agreed to take things slowly, allowing David to visit Tommy regularly. For a while, it seemed like things might be okay, but deep down, Emily couldn't shake the fear that David would hurt them again, that he would leave just as quickly as he had returned. One day, when Tommy was with David, Emily received a call. It was the hospital. David had been in a car accident on his way to drop Tommy off. Though Tommy was unharmed, David was in critical condition. At the hospital, Emily sat by David's side, memories of their life together flooding her mind. Despite everything, there was a part of her that still cared for him. And as she held his hand, she realized that no matter what happened, she needed to let go of the past. For Tommy, for herself. David survived, but things would never be the same. Though they would never be a family again, they found a way to co-parent for Tommy's sake. The scars of their broken relationship remained, but they learned to navigate the challenges, each step forward marked by forgiveness and growth. Tommy, too, learned that love and family were complicated, but he found solace in the unwavering love of his mother. And though their journey had been marked by heartache, they emerged from it stronger, bound by the unbreakable bond between mother and son.